Welcome to the third annual GradFutures Forum hosted by the Graduate School at Princeton University. We're delighted you could join us for the third year of this annual event, an expanded week-long professional development conference designed to meet the imperative of graduate student professional development at this moment, and to signal the Graduate School's strong commitment to preparing our PhD students for the future of work and empowering them with the clarity, competencies, connections, and confidence they need now and in the future. There are more than a dozen engaging keynote speakers, skill-building workshops, and networking sessions highlighting diverse career options within and beyond the academy. Our goal is to share inspirational stories and practical advice, and to facilitate connections and community among the broader graduate community. I'd like to extend my sincere thanks to my team, Assistant Deans James Van Wyk, our coordinator Laura Christensen, and all of our graduate student fellows and associates for all of their efforts in putting together today's events and this year's forum. And the entire graduate school staff and the campus-wide professional development working group, all who have been working to support this event and to whom we owe a debt of gratitude for their ongoing efforts on behalf of graduate students. I'd also like to give a huge shout out to all of the graduate alumni who have been in contact with us since the beginning of Grad Futures and who continue to reach out and to connect with our graduate students as mentors and as champions. It is my pleasure to introduce Christopher Caterine this afternoon. Chris is also a longtime friend and supporter of Grad Futures and an advocate for graduate student professional development on the national stage. Chris connects the dots between mission, message, and market so that others can convey their vision and their value more effectively. We invited him several times to speak with our graduate students, and our graduate students continue to reach out to request that we invite him back again and again. The Princeton Citizen Scientists Graduate Student Organization is actually co-sponsoring Chris's talk today. Chris has had an amazing career, approaching diverse challenges with the eye of a communications strategist. Chris has helped deliver 100 million plus consulting proposals. He's restructured nonprofit operations and led small business development efforts. His writing has been featured in outlets such as Inside Higher Ed and Research Professional News, and he has spoken on finding post-PhD career success and happiness at institutions such as Princeton, Johns Hopkins, and Stanford. His book, Leaving Academia, A Practical Guide, was published by Princeton University Press in 2020. Chris currently lives in New Orleans with his wife, Mallory, their son, Caleb, and their cat, Lil Easy. He tweets at CL Caterine. Chris is also in the midst of a life change and a move, so we are extraordinarily appreciative to him for his time in joining us today. Chris, welcome to the Grad Futures Forum.
Thank you so much for having me, Eva, and thank you to all of you for being here to talk about leaving academia today. As Eva said, this topic is really, really dear to my heart. And to give a little bit of context, the picture that you can see on screen is from 2017. This was actually my first day in my first non-academic job, standing in a hotel room in Houston, taking a selfie. You can see that I'm fresh-faced and I'm excited. And it's a nice, optimistic picture to show off at the start of an event like this that is focused on seeking careers beyond the academy. But I'd started down the path to that picture almost 3 years earlier. And the picture that's coming up on screen now is from around Christmas of 2015. At this point, I had spent nearly 10 years working to become a professor of classical studies, and heading into the winter conferences where job interviews happened, I realized that my career as an academic was probably over. Now, in this moment, I didn't know what I could do for work, and confronting that reality took its toll. I had huge bags under my eyes from fatigue. That was before I had Caleb, so those fatigue lines actually count. I was trying to grow a goatee, this is not very good. Essentially, I was dread personified. And the reason that I was taking this change so hard wasn't just that I didn't know what I could do if I wasn't an academic. That was, of course, part of it, but that was only one piece. The bigger issue is that I didn't know who I would be if I wasn't an academic. And that identity crisis was an extremely heavy burden, and it really left me unsure of how to proceed. Now, as I said a few minutes ago, you all know that I eventually got to a happy outcome, and I look a little bit better here in 2017 than I did in 2015. But that shift only happened after like 2.5 years of depression and desperation. If we go all the way back to winter 2014-15 when I began this process, and 2.5 years of depression and desperation is a long time for anybody to be living in that state. And my hope today is to provide all of you with some tools that are going to help you run that personal gauntlet of identity crisis as you leave the academy faster, and tools to do it with less guesswork than I had to do it with way back in 2015 to 2017. Now, after we're done, I hope that you all will see that leaving academia doesn't just have to be not scary, it can actually be fun too. So let's begin with where you all can begin on this journey. 85%. 85% is the percentage of experienced hires that are made through referral, according to LinkedIn. Now, all of you as doctoral students and PhDs will fall into this experienced hire category. And this statistic, therefore, offers very important evidence for how you all should think about looking for work outside of the academy. Sending out resume after resume to HR departments, hoping that you will get noticed, that only helps 15% of applicants at that critical experience, mid-career and above level. Most of those people in that 15% probably also have technical skills that PhDs lack or that aren't immediately obvious to a recruiter. And so that isn't the best way to apply for jobs. Just sending out resumes, probably not how you're going to find work. Instead, what you want to do is seek jobs through referral. You want to build relationships. That is to say, find somebody who will take your resume and bring it to HR for you, or better yet, take your resume past HR and go directly to a hiring manager and say, hey, I know this person. I think you should give them a look. Now, again, since this statistic is true for 85% of people applying for experienced roles, it's statistically the best strategy to follow. That's going to be true regardless of your academic discipline, humanities, STEM, doesn't matter. It's going to be true regardless of your background, whether your parents had PhDs, whether you're first-gen student, doesn't matter. It's going to be true regardless of your personality, if you're introverted or extroverted. Statistically, this is the right path. Now, even if we assume, that LinkedIn, who developed this research, has a vested interest in this number being as high as possible, I still think we should take it seriously, because even if it's 20% too high, that still means that 2/3 of jobs are found by referral rather than by straight application at the experience level. And so this, I think, gives you a hint into the best strategy to follow as you move on in your careers. Now, hopefully that number convinces you all that this is the best strategy to follow. Hopefully the next question you ask then is, how do you build relationships that lead to a job? And I think this is a problem for many, many people coming out of academia, right? We spend so many years trying to become experts. And as we do that, we tend to throw ourselves into our disciplines wholeheartedly. And we tend to focus on those disciplines to the exclusion of all else. As a result of that, very often our professional contacts, for sure, but even our friendships can sort of get narrowed down, first to academia, then even to our own field, sometimes even to our subfields, or at least closely related ones. And oftentimes, because of that, we just have fewer and fewer relationships with people who work outside of the academy. And if we do have those relationships, we might think, based on them, that we don't like the kind of work that those people do, or it wouldn't be well suited to us. Well, fortunately, there is a free, repeatable, and proven approach to build relationships that lead to jobs if we have found ourselves in this narrowed state of not knowing that many people. And that's called informational interviews. Now, the strategy of informational interviews is so effective that I've made it the central part of my book. And I want to emphasize this isn't common just to academics who've changed careers. It's also common to professionals from other backgrounds who've had to make a pivot at some point during their life for one reason or another. And I met with like 150 people as I was leaving academia. And this was one of the most recurring pieces of advice that came out is you need to get out and talk to people. And that was true, again, for everybody I met from all sorts of different backgrounds. Now, the reason I like informational interviews so much is that they do a lot of things simultaneously. And the rest of my talk today is going to be divided up to discuss three things in turn. First, I'm going to talk about how informational interviews help you discover new careers. Second, I'm going to explain how they help you expand the number of people who can help you find an open role. And lastly, I'm going to explain how they can help you to translate your experience for non-academic audiences. So again, today's talk is in three parts. We're going to hit on how informational interviews help you discover, expand, and translate, each one in turn. We're going to start out with how they help you discover new careers. Okay, first, a definition. Informational interviews are at heart just short conversations between yourself and a professional who has a job that you find interesting. Crucially, this doesn't need to be a job you want. They just need to have a job, have a role, or work in an industry that you want to learn more about. Okay. Now, it might be helpful to think of informational interviews a bit like a type of data collection. Okay. Essentially, informational interviews let you find out what day-to-day life is like in jobs that you haven't held, which there are an awful lot of them, right? They let you figure out what kind of work you might like or you might dislike. And they let you identify skills or knowledge sets that you might need to gain if you wanted to pursue work in a given role or in a given field. Now, as all of you know as professional researchers, having one data point isn't terribly helpful. And that means one informational interview doesn't do you much good. You need to do lots and lots of these things, right? And you need to collect a wide range of data because you want to make sure that your sample isn't biased, right? And once you have that sample of data, you want to start to identify trends within it, right? And then once we identify trends within our data, we do the re-part of research, which is going back again, doing a deeper dive and trying to validate our initial impressions with further study, right? So I want you all to think of informational interviews as essentially a way to do data collection in like a career research project, okay? Now, another important aspect of research is that it helps us eliminate assumptions, okay? And I think that very often we believe that we know more than we actually do, right? And this is true in our knowledge of careers as much as it's true in any other arena. And the best way to demonstrate this is to think about who you've really asked about their day-to-day work, right? I think all of us have family members or friends from college who work outside of academia, but what I'm wondering is, have any of you actually conducted a formal interview to sit down and ask them, hey, mom, what does your day-to-day life look like at work, right? Or instead, have you just sort of pieced together an idea of what that job is through chance anecdotes and stories and conversations that you've had? And I actually don't want this to be a rhetorical question. I want you all to answer this now. And so if we can pull up the poll, you all should be able to answer this question and check all that apply. Who have you really asked about their work? Friends, parents, or professors? And by asked about, I mean sat down and had a meaningful conversation, say a 30-minute chat with them. Okay, that's good. Some people have done this. There we go. Starting to get a few more responses as people react. All right, this is better than usual, which is really, really good. I think the fact that we're seeing that most people have in fact had these conversations shows just how much has begun to change since I went out and began looking for new careers again, 2015, 2016. This is considered more normal now. This was sort of unknown to me. I knew nobody who had done this when I started. Okay, good. So we're seeing about 50% of people on parents and professors, 81% on friends. Awesome. Okay, that's really good. Thank you all for sharing. So let's go ahead and move on. I hadn't spoken with any of these people until I was about 30 years old. And I think it's kind of insane to think about that now because I've been pursuing the job of a professor for about 10 years at that point. If you go back to when I committed to going to grad school and becoming a professor. And, as I was 30 years old and thought back and said, oh my God, I've been trying to do this thing for 10 years and I never asked somebody what the job actually was. That was nuts. And it made me realize that so many of my ideas about work, what I thought was kind of a good or a bad job, or an acceptable or unacceptable job, was based on assumption about how that stuff was done instead of based on fact. And most of it was just informed by these chance conversations, by pop culture, and by other unreliable data points. That as a researcher made me kind of embarrassed to think that this important thing, the way I spent 8+ waking hours a day, that I hadn't actually gone ahead and done detailed research on it. Now, our goal in informational interviews is to reliably replace assumptions with actual data. As I said, they are essentially the method that you can apply to a career research project, and they're going to help you capture the data you need to support a career change. So we know these things. That's good. Next question most of you are probably asking is, how the heck do I start if this is something that's so good to do? And more than that, how do informational interviews actually work? The simple answer is that you start by identifying people who interest you, right? That means, again, people with a job title or a skill that you find interesting, that you want to learn more about. It does not need to be a job that you want, just one that you realize you don't know as much about as maybe you should. So that could mean people who have a job you're interested in finding out about whether it would be good for you. It could be people who work at a company, a nonprofit, or a government agency that you simply want to learn more about, or that does work that impresses you. Right? It could be any number of ways. And some common ways to find these people include going to family and friends, talking to departmental alumni, doing networking events like you all have organized for the GradFutures Forum this week, or even going to a site like LinkedIn to find people and cold contact. Now, once you've identified somebody to have a meeting with, you need to actually ask for a meeting, and you need to briefly ask for a meeting. Right? If you know the person already, it's easy. Send them a note, say you want to do this informational interview thing. If they're a friend of a friend, you can ask for an email of introduction. That's easy, no issues, fine. But if you don't know the person, there's a bit more legwork that you need to do, right? You need to find their email or contact information through a company website, through LinkedIn, and you need to send them a note. You might even use Twitter for this too. Now, when you're asking for this meeting, what you want to ask for is a brief 30-minute chat to find out more about what they do and how they got where they are. Okay, and the key is to be brief. You don't want to write a 2-page email. You just want a few sentences. And don't worry, most people are actually going to be flattered that you're asking for this advice. It can feel like an imposition when you make this cold contact, and it really isn't, provided that you keep that note brief instead of 2 pages, like I once sent to somebody back in 2016. Now, since I know academics tend not to be great at the briefly part, I certainly wasn't. Here's an example. John, my name is Chris Caterine, and I'm currently seeking a new career after 10 years in academia. Your history caught my eye on LinkedIn, and I'd love to learn more about how you got where you are today. If you're open to having a 30-minute chat, let me know your availability, and I can set up a time. Thanks, Chris. That is it. 3 sentences, who you are, how you found them, what you want. Get in, get out. If you take up any more time than that with background and explanation, you're actually stealing time that they haven't volunteered to you. You'll have plenty of time to address all of that if they accept a meeting. No reason to do it when asking for the call. Now, next thing to do is to show up and ask questions. And you want to show up on time and have those questions ready ahead of time. You should research the person on LinkedIn, on a company website, whatever it is, and know their basic CV. And the goal here isn't to be creepy. Like, you probably shouldn't know their kids' names or their pet's name and bring that up in conversation. But you kind of want to know, hey, again, roughly what have they done? What's the chronological sequence of the jobs that they've held, or maybe a nonprofit that they've worked with. And you want to have enough information to ask meaningful questions. And one of the ways to do that is to come in and ask sort of open-ended things that point to these pivotal moments in their career. And your job is, or your goal here is to try to uncover information that's going to help you figure out if the job this person has is one that you might want to do, to see what skills or knowledge sets, again, you might need to do it, and to see whether that's a job that can keep your career moving if you go down that path, instead of being one where you'll stall out and need to make another kind of radical pivot in short order. So what do these questions look like? Here are a few of my favorites. Just general open-ended starter. How did you get where you are today? 2-minute version. Almost everybody outside of academia will have that version of themselves. Next, tell me about a day in the life. What does a normal day look like for you? And when people invariably say, hey, there's no such thing as a normal day, ask them for what a normal project looks like, okay? Another favorite of mine is what makes a day really good or what makes a day really bad. This sort of tells you what somebody enjoys, right? What they're actually spending their time on, and what the more monotonous sides of the job are. Another good one, what skills do you wish you had when you started? This one tells you two things simultaneously. First, like what skills you might need to do the job in question, but also it reminds you of the fact that most people can't do everything that a job requires when they start. They have a subset of skills that they need, but they need to build others out as time goes on. And this is a very useful way to figure out kind of what skills are essential and which ones maybe you can build on the fly or just show a basic proficiency in without needing to be really expert at. Lastly, you can ask, where do people generally go after holding this role? You need to be a little bit careful with this one. You don't want to give the impression that you're already thinking about kind of leapfrogging the person that you're meeting with. But this can be useful to figure out if a job is sort of worth your effort. And I remember speaking with somebody in college admissions, and I said, hey, what do people do after this? And she said, oh, most people use their time here. They use their tuition waiver to get an MBA, and then they go off and do something unrelated. And for me, I said, oh man, that's valuable information because I don't want to have another change in 2 to 3 years. That's not what I want next. And so at that point, I just stopped looking at college admissions. And that actually saved me a lot of time because I probably could have had 5 more conversations with people in that space. But I didn't have to because I learned a valuable thing, which is that it didn't have the kind of upward mobility that I wanted. Now, next thing to do is actually something not to do. Don't ask for a job in an informational interview. Remember, it's not a job interview. It's just a fact-finding mission. And they'll already know that you're looking for work based on the fact that you are changing careers. Okay, you don't need to say it. And actually, they'll tend to be more inclined to help you if you don't. Now, at the end of your time, you want to wrap up and you want to ask for contacts. Do stick to your time as much as possible. If they say they can stay long, maybe go an extra 5, 10, 15 minutes, but really put an end to it after that. The goal is to be respectful of their time, so they'll hopefully give you more in the future. Now, at the end of the discussion, do make sure to ask if they can connect you to anybody else they think you should speak with. This is going to help you get more informational interviews without having to cold contact people, which isn't fun for anybody, even when you get used to it, okay? The other side of wrapping up is not just ending on time, but actually ending early if it seems like the person across from you has lost interest or isn't in a position or of a disposition to help you. And the worst meeting that I actually had actually lasted just 7 minutes. And it was with a dean of arts and sciences or dean of liberal arts at an institution I was teaching at. We kind of talked for a few minutes. I realized this person was not in a position to help me. She had good reasons not to, I think. But I realized I wasn't going to get anything out of the discussion. So I said, okay, thank you very much. I think I have what I need. Have a good day. And that was that. And again, being respectful of people, even when you have sort of a negative result, is a really critical part of this. All right. Lastly, you want to say thank you and keep in touch. A thank you email, usually send, within 24 to 36 hours, always a nice touch. And the thing you can do in this is reiterate key advice that stood out from your meeting with this person. That shows that you were paying attention, and it shows that you value the time they gave you. I then like to follow up every 6 to 8 weeks. What this does is a few things. Number one, it reminds them that you're still looking, even though you don't need to say it, right? Because if you're still making these connections, you're obviously still looking for work. It gives you a chance to tell them how you took their advice, which again shows them that you value their time and gives you a chance to say thank you. And it lets you ask for more contacts that you can conduct informational interviews with one last time. And I found that sometimes just being in a different mental state 6 to 8 weeks on can actually help jog my memory in a different way and help me think of somebody who's really an ideal fit for somebody that just wasn't top of mind when we spoke. Okay, so that's it. Really easy. That's kind of how these things go in a nutshell. And you're going to do lots and lots of these informational interviews, and the goal is to extract lots and lots of data about possible careers. And to use that data effectively, you need to identify trends in your interests over time. There are a few ways you can do that. If you're the journaling type, you can keep a career journal or a notebook. This is something that I recommend in my book, but I am not the journaling type. I'm really bad at it. I just tend not to keep up the habit. So another thing you might do is to find an accountability buddy, somebody else who is changing careers, who you can debrief with and discuss what you liked or disliked in a given role, and have them kind of play things back and help you identify those trends as time goes on and help you zero in on stuff that gets you excited consistently. Because the things that you're excited to talk about are probably good indicators of job activities or job functions that could be a good fit for you. One word of warning in having an accountability buddy: do not use a partner that you're in a relationship with as an accountability buddy. I did, and that was a mistake. It put way too much pressure on my wife to simultaneously be an emotional support in our relationship, to be a financial support as I was staring down potential unemployment at the end of a terminal contract, and also to talk through this stuff day to day with me. That really wasn't good, and she's been quite adamant that I tell everybody else, please don't do this. Find somebody else who exists outside of that relationship so you can keep the two separate, right? And obviously your partner will be interested in what you're doing, but they don't need all of that sort of play-by-play kind of debriefing. It's just not terribly helpful. Okay, so we've talked about how informational interviews can help you discover new careers. You just talk to people, you learn about them, you refine your interests over time. Next, it's time to talk about how they can expand the number of people who can help you find a job, going back to that 85% figure that we began with. Now, I have been avoiding a word for my first 30 minutes speaking here, and I suspect some of you have noticed it's a word that some of you might find a little bit offensive, so I'm sorry it's about to come up on screen right now, but the word is networking, okay? Remember, I started by saying that 85% of experienced hires are made by referral, and consequently, we said that building relationships that connect you to jobs is a critical strategy. Relationships that connect you to jobs, that is networking. That's what it is, okay? Now, the reason I've delayed talking about it in this way is because I was initially skeptical of networking when I started my career search, and I suspect many of you might be too. I assumed that it was transactional and self-interested, and it seemed really gross and slimy. And I was simply unwilling to ask for somebody's time and attention if I wasn't going to treat them as a human being first and foremost. To kind of go in hoping to get a job out of something just seemed gross. Now, fortunately, I learned that networking doesn't have to be unethical. It doesn't have to be slimy. It can actually be an enjoyable way to expand the number of people who can connect you to jobs. But you need to understand how it actually works. We need to replace some assumption with fact in order to understand how we can do this in a way that is ethical and not slimy. So let's start again with a definition. Networking is at its heart an efficient way to connect person A, who needs work, that's all of you, to person C, who needs work done. That's a hiring manager. Okay, we have person A, we have person C. You all can probably guess in the middle here is a person B. This is the so-called mutual contact who knows both of you and realizes that you might be able to help one another. Person B is what makes networking an efficient way to fill open roles in an organization. Now, what are the safety valves that keeps this kind of interaction from getting slimy? Well, if you're going to go out and have an informational interview with person B, hoping they can connect you to person C, one of the things that keeps you from being slimy about that is you don't actually know who person B knows. You certainly don't know who they know well, right? And that means that you need to go into your informational interviews without assuming that you can be connected to anybody else. Just go into it as an opportunity to get data about jobs and expect your contact to provide that data if they agree to do it. And if that's all that happens, it's still a successful meeting. You're still good. If they happen to connect you to a person C, who's either another contact to have an informational interview with, or somebody who happens to be hiring that you might be a good match for, that's lagniappe. That's a bonus, right? But we don't need to assume that going in. We can just get what we need out of the meeting, be respectful, and move on. A second safety valve in this relationship: people aren't dumb. Okay, if you hit it off with somebody, if you are respecting the reason for the meeting and you seem like a good person, they're going to be willing to connect you to more of their contacts and sort of more valuable members of their network. Okay, but if you go in like acting sleazy, just trying to mine their network for opportunities and move on, they will be able to tell, and it will make them less likely to help you. And I say this from experience because I had somebody come to me and say, "Hey, I know your friend. Would you be willing to give me some time? I said, well, of course, if you know them, I'd be happy to. And as we were speaking, it became clear that this person didn't actually know that person at all. They'd added them on LinkedIn very briefly, traded one note, and then used that to piggyback to get access to me and my network. And this kind of put me off. And before I'd even kind of processed the conversation, I had friends asking me like, hey, this person just reached out and said they know you. And I had to actually pump the brakes and say, I actually don't. And I think, keep them at arm's length. And I actually went so far as to unconnect from this person on LinkedIn, which I almost never do. But they were being slimy. They were using my network, and I didn't want to let that happen. I wanted to protect my relationships with people that I knew professionally. And so, again, if you kind of come in, people will notice this. If you do it in a sleazy way, it's not going to get you where you think you need to go, or at least not long term. Okay. Now, third reason this isn't sleazy is that you are not the only person benefiting from this connection. I think we often think as academics that like we're going out hat in hand asking for a job, right? And that isn't actually how this is. Person C needs work done. They are losing opportunities every minute that they're not working at full capacity. And they're probably themselves working 1.5 to 2 jobs, not spending time with their families or with their friends because they need that role filled. So you aren't just kind of coming in saying, please give me a job. You're doing something that they need done, and you bring value to this equation. So if somebody connects you to somebody who's hiring, you're helping them as much as they are helping you. Now, lastly, the last thing that keeps this from being slimy is that you'll actually find sooner than you think that you can start being a person B yourself. That is to say that you can start introducing people in your network to one another who might be able to help each other out. I think for me, it happened at 6 weeks. I've been doing informational interviews intensively, 1 to 2 a week for 6 weeks. And in week 6, I found somebody that I could connect to somebody else that I'd met. When that happens, you realize that you're actually in this game for real and providing value to other people instead of just taking it out of the system. And once you start paying things forward in that way, you start to realize that like this give and take is just part of how business gets done and relationships get built. It feels good. It's nice to help people. And you don't feel as bad taking stuff out because you know that you're actually contributing equally. Now, this is where networking gets really good because the math of networking isn't linear. Every person you meet probably has a professional network of 100 to 150 people, right? Which means that they can potentially connect you to lots and lots of person C's, right? And if you do enough informational interviews, the odds of meeting somebody who knows someone who has an open role goes up exponentially, right? This math is exponential. Compare that to sending out your resumes to HR. 1-to-1 relationship there. That is linear math, linear algebra. We don't like it. It's high effort, low reward, right? You want to find something that is low to medium effort and extremely high reward. And networking gives you that exponential curve that you need to get to that point. Now, this is essentially the so-called strength of weak ties, which is the thesis of a pioneering 1973 study by Mark Granovetter. And essentially the thesis says, distant acquaintances lead to more and better job possibilities than close friends. Distant acquaintances lead to more and better job possibilities than close friends. And so networking, where you are building these weak ties very quickly and in quick succession, is just one of the most effective ways to find work. And it has been for a very, very long time. So to sum up this section, informational interviews are a path to ethical networking. By meeting lots of people, you get lots of chances to build good relationships. And by building good relationships, you are more likely to be introduced to more good people. The exponential math of networking makes this a reliable way to find open jobs. Again, why does this work? It's because the people who take meetings with you for informational interviews are excited to help. They're excited to help you and they're flattered that you're asking for their advice. They're also excited to help their friends who are overworked and need a role filled, right? And this helps to explain that 85% figure that we began with, that 85% of experienced hires are made by referral. Networking is an efficient way to solve problems for 2 people at once, and it feels good, so people do it all the time. And that, again, is why this is such an effective strategy for you all to follow as you begin looking for work outside of the academy. All right, So we've talked about how informational interviews help you discover new careers and expand the number of people who can help you find jobs. Time to turn to our last section today, which is how informational interviews can teach you to translate your academic experience for new audiences. I think it was the third informational interview that I had done with somebody outside of academia. I met them at a local bar called the Cellar Door, which is here on screen. I know that I looked overdressed. I think I went in with a jacket that was probably a little bit too big for me and a button-down shirt at a trendy cocktail bar in New Orleans in August. Okay, walked in with the leather-bound portfolio for my legal pad that I've had since I did mock trial as a 16-year-old kid that had a coffee stain from when I was 17 still on it. Probably didn't look like somebody out of 2016, 2017. Looked like somebody more out of like 1998, essentially. Now, in spite of me being awkward and new at all this, the conversation went really well. I spoke with this woman, learned about her work in public school operations, and specifically how New Orleans manages giving physical properties to charter schools to manage. And New Orleans, since Katrina, has become 100% charter system in the public schools. So sort of a neat, interesting thing I didn't know about. It was education focused, but K through 12. And a side of education that I had never really thought of, which is how you manage property as a municipal system. And this woman fielded my questions for about 45 minutes, but she wasn't an impolite person. And eventually she said, "Hey, Chris, this is all well and good to talk about me, but like, why are you changing careers? What are you looking for here?" And my answer went something like this. I'm a visiting assistant professor, and I've got one more year on my contract. So they're going to fire me at the end of next year, no matter how good I am at my job. And my evaluations are really good, but it doesn't matter because academia. And the job market really isn't great. There were like 50 tenure track positions in my field last year. There are 35 this year. It just seems like that trend line is going in the wrong way. So maybe I need to start looking outside. My wife also, she's an academic in the same field. So we have this two-body problem. And we're thinking maybe we want to start a family soon. And you can't exactly do that if you live in separate places. And because of what the salaries are in academia, the finances probably wouldn't work out for us to have two separate homes anyway. And so, I know I'm really smart. I know I can do stuff in other areas. I just don't know what that is yet. And so I'm out here meeting people like you to figure it out. Okay, so that was the answer that I gave. Some of you may have feelings about that it was an honest answer, a good answer, a bad answer. But I want to give you a sense of how that answer was by her reaction to me, which is that after I gave that answer, the meeting ended fairly quickly. She did not want to stay for another drink to keep going. Since that time, I sent this woman, I think, 3 or 4 messages by email or LinkedIn, and I have not gotten a response to a single one of them. Including in a moment when a nonprofit I was supporting had its property destroyed in a tornado, and I needed help from somebody expert in allocating property to nonprofits or educational groups in New Orleans. This was like the one person I knew who would have been perfect. She didn't take the call, and I suspect that is on me. Now, you might be thinking you're a better communicator than I was, but I'd like to test that hypothesis with a simple question. And again, we're going to call it a poll to answer this. And so the question is, have you ever had an awkward discussion about your academic work at a family holiday dinner? Let's go ahead and pull that up. Already we have some answers coming in. Yes. So far, there's just one response at 100%. If you all can go ahead and answer. I can think of an awful lot of these. This is the famous, so what are you going to do with that conversation that I think all of us in the humanities especially have had. So far, 5, 6, all 100%. Somebody who hasn't, a few people who haven't. Interesting. Okay. I don't know for sure. I might guess that either you come from academic families or possibly you are early in your grad careers and haven't gone home for a holiday yet, potentially, to have that awkward conversation. Because I do feel like this is something that is so common. We're 16 responses. Can we get any more? Just want to see how this lands out. 75-25 is nice, but I suspect that's not actually reflective of where this is. Yeah, I've been explaining to my uncle who flies helicopters for years. I tried to explain what I was doing as an academic, and I never actually succeeded. And we have better conversations now that I'm in consulting. He'd spent some time in IT consulting earlier in his career. Okay, look, I think we seem to be settling out here somewhere around the 75-25. That's actually good, I think. Hopefully, that 26% of people here has actually just gotten good at explaining what you do, which means that you're doing something important, which is speaking to people outside of the academy. So let's go ahead and move on. The question, I think, is why do so many academics struggle with this sort of conversation, right? The family dinner table conversation. It's really a sign of a communication breakdown. And I'm glad to see that so many of you don't suffer from this or haven't yet. But 75% is still the vast majority. And I think it often feels like academics that we just can't convey what we do to other people. And if I think back to my conversation at the bar, I can spot a few issues. First thing, throughout that spiel that I gave about why I was leaving, I was 100% focused on myself and my feelings. I'm really smart. This is what I've done. I was looking backwards and talking about things that maybe I wanted to do in the future, but it was all like family-oriented stuff, right? It was me and my feelings. Second, I expected a lot of esoteric knowledge, right? I talked about visiting positions and a two-body problem. This woman wasn't an academic. Those are kind of jargony terms that she wouldn't have understood. And third, I gave her no grounding point to enter the conversation. Because when somebody says all that, like, what's your answer? Like, oh yeah, Chris, that's too bad. Okay. Maybe that's fine if I'm talking to a close friend, but like she wasn't. This is a woman who I'd met 45 minutes before. She was there to network. She was there to help me. She was there to connect me to people who she knew. And my answer didn't give her any ways to help me because it didn't give her any indication of what I was good at, of what I was thinking I wanted to do next, of the type of person who I thought I might want to meet. She couldn't change anything that I complained about in that answer. And so, in other words, I told her where I was instead of meeting her where she was. And I sort of answered that question honestly, but selfishly. Okay. And that is a really big problem. Because that selfishness meant that I didn't bridge the gap between my experience and hers. And if we want to get our ideas across effectively, we have to bridge that gap. Now, in rhetoric, we often talk about how the audience drives the message. And what we mean by that is that we need to think about the reception of our message, how something's going to be heard, before we think about how we are going to deliver it. And we have to think about other people before we think about ourselves. We need to sort of make ourselves secondary to other people, even when talking about ourselves. Now, translation is a really helpful metaphor to understand this concept. Suppose that you all are the editor of a university press. I don't know if mine is in the audience, but maybe he is. And if I went to Peter, let's say, and I said, hey, Peter, I really want to translate Virgil's Aeneid from Latin into Japanese. Peter would say, well, Chris, you're a classics PhD. I know you know Latin really well, but I didn't know you knew Japanese. How well do you know it? If I turned around and said, well, Peter, don't worry about my Japanese. I'm really good at Latin. I have a PhD. What's he going to do? Like, hopefully, Peter, if he's good at his job, which he is going to laugh me out of his office and tell me to take a hike, right? Because to translate, yeah, you need to know the original language, but you need to know the target language too. You need to be able to convert ideas that are kind of simple and common quickly and efficiently. And you need to be able to approximate those harder concepts that don't carry over neatly across times and places, right? If we took a concept like freedom in American discourse right now, like trying to convey that in another language could be tricky because it's freighted with so much meaning and sometimes contradictory meanings all at once. Well, translation applies when you're talking across professions too. And after 3 to 5 years in higher education, all of you are conversant in academies. You all speak academies. Now, jargon, the language you use within your discipline, is part of that language, but there's more to it than that. Really, what's happened is in the course of getting your PhD or kind of starting out through grad school, you all have been acculturated into the profession of academia. That means you've learned specific ways to speak and to behave, ways to structure information, ways to frame questions at public lectures, ways to conduct yourself in the presence of your advisor or a university president or other graduate students or other PhDs who are on an equal footing with you, right? You've adopted shared values, things that you praise and blame in common. We all praise the creation of new human knowledge. We all blame plagiarism, right? We share these things in common as academics. And we also have common institutions. These are things that are most easily seen through acronyms, okay? You have these both within your discipline, kind of science-specific or discipline-specific acronyms. You also have them at your institution, right? So if I talk about PUP, I mean Princeton University Press. And in a Princeton context, the first P in anything is you're going to assume means Princeton most of the time, right? So acronyms can be a helpful way to spot some of those aspects of a shared language and shared culture. Now, the problem is that you all speak academies, not other professional languages, right? Most of you have not spent extensive time working in other fields. And just like I can't translate Latin into Japanese until I know Japanese, you all can't translate academies and your academic experience into other professional contexts until you take the time to learn their languages. Well, this is where informational interviews come back in. As you learn about new careers and talk to people in different sectors, you learn a lot. Some of that is about what they do and whether you want to do it. But in the course of these conversations, you also get like meta knowledge about these careers. You hear how they think, what they value, how they structure information. You start learning their professional culture and their professional jargon. And as your career search continues, that learning continues too, right? You're going to identify trends in your interests. And then as you identify something that's promising, you might do the part of research, right? You're going to have more chats with people in that area. And as you do that, you're going to get more and more data about the grammar of their professional language. And that's going to help you be better and better at translating your experience into terms that make sense to them. Put differently, informational interviews are akin to an immersion program. Okay, they are rapidly going to teach you a new professional language and culture. They're going to prepare you to translate your experience more effectively. And learning how to translate is really, really important. And the reason is because at some point you are going to meet a hiring manager and they are going to tell you, well, you seem nice enough, I like you, but you are overqualified, but you're underskilled. That is to say, you have too much education and no way to apply it. I'm sorry, at some point, all of you is going to run into this, most likely. And overcoming this perception is one of the biggest barriers I think all of us face in leaving academia. And I'm going to say especially folks in the humanities and social sciences, where people kind of always question the value of studying literature, for example. Now, there is some good news. The good news is that you all now know that you speak academies, and you know that other people don't. And hopefully, I've convinced you to take the time to learn new professional languages before you begin translating. And translating effectively is going to be what helps you overcome this bias against people with your professional background. Now, as I suggested, any translation is going to be profession specific. You need to learn that profession before you can do it effectively. Now, that said, there are a few high-level steps you can follow to speed that work along, to get a kind of best guess or a running start as you do this. Now, as academics, I think we're often trained to talk about what you do, right? So I personally worked on an epic poem about the civil war between Pompey and Caesar. If you all weren't sleeping 5 minutes ago, you probably are now, right? The focus here is on subject matter. And it's a bunch of details, right? I said poetry, half of you fell asleep. I said civil war, some of you said too political. I said Pompey and Caesar, another half of you said, I don't even know who those guys are. Okay, assuming they're guys, might not even know. Within my field of classics, this is useful because it positions me within that field. It tells people I did Roman poetry and history. But outside of that context, very few people have an access point to engage with this way of describing what I do. I'm too deep in the weeds. And really, this is just an obscure and off-putting way to talk about my work. Worse than that, y'all, I said I worked on an epic poem. That description of what I did is so hopelessly vague that nobody can tease out what it means. Did I write the thing? Did I study it? Did I analyze it? Did I reconstruct it? It could mean anything. It's useless. So don't talk about what you do. It is not terribly helpful when you go outside the academy. Instead, what you want to do is pull your work up a level, and you want to talk about how you do it. And what we're looking for here is an abstract, non-jargony description of your approach and methodology. So instead of saying, I worked on an epic poem about the civil war between Pompey and Caesar, I might say this. I analyzed how language creates an emotional effect on its readers. And I did that by studying how individual words contribute to big picture meaning. Now, this is a little bit more accessible, and I'll explain a few ways in which it is. Number one, it talks about two things that every single human being has an experience of, which is language, okay, we all have at least one, and emotion. We're all supposed to feel those things, right? So we all have language, we all have emotion. And I think most of us have had the experience of encountering a work of art, be it literature, music, film, and having it have an emotional impact on us. We might have questioned, hey, why the heck, how does that happen? It's actually kind of wild that it can. And so what I've done here is given people a description of my work that gives them two, maybe even a third area that they can ask a follow-up question about. So this is a more accessible description because I don't use jargon, but it also lets the other person stay in control of where we go. It lets them choose how the conversation is going to flow. And I haven't kind of dragged them into the depths of the details of what I do. I've allowed them to express an interest, express their interest as part of the conversation and follow, instead of assuming that they will be interested in what I am interested in or what I know. Now, how you do it is great. It's actually not that hard once you practice it a little bit. Once you do that, you can focus on why your work matters. And some of you might be panicking a little bit right now. I think we all struggle with this question of why our work matters. And it often leads to awkward mumbling, even with other academics. And I was one of the worst offenders here. But there's a good reason why this is hard. And that's that why something matters is always relative, right? I think we tend to assume that when people ask us, hey, why does your work matter? They mean, why does it matter to us? And that's one way to take it, right? But why is always relative. And if you want to prioritize the other person, then we need to kind of go through a different calculation. First, we need to know or guess or infer something about the person who's hearing what we say. What do they think? What do they value, right? Then we need to quickly reframe our experience in terms that make sense to them rather than focusing on why they make sense to us. And this is one of the reasons why we do so many informational interviews, right? We want to get as much of that data as possible so we can translate why effectively, so we can translate value effectively. Now, of course, when you go out into an informational interview, you will not always have full information or much information on the people you meet. And so sometimes you need to make an educated guess. So let's talk about me again. As an academic, I taught a 3-3 as a VAP in Class 6. This might make sense if I'm talking to somebody in the humanities, but it probably doesn't make sense to most people outside of that because they're going to reply, what the heck is a 33 VAP, right? I'm using insider jargon. VAP stands for Visiting Assistant Professor, a temporary terminal contract, kind of like a postdoc for the humanities for my STEM folks in the audience. I've also suppressed a bunch of words in this explanation that are essential to its meaning. A 3-3 means 3 courses per semester, a standard teaching load, right? Now, instead, if I don't want to do this, I need to do something different. And if I'm talking to somebody in business, I'm going to say the following. I provided educational services valued at $500,000 per year for the Department of Classical Studies. Now, this ties my activity, what I did, to the core services of the institution. Oh, university education. Got it. It attaches a big flashy value to my work. $500,000 per year. Sounds like you're generating revenue. Pretty good. Okay. And it speaks in a language that my audience feels like they will understand, even if they don't know exactly what it means. So it's going to feel familiar and invite a question about what that actually means. But again, I'm going to keep them in control, let them choose where to go. Now, if I'm not talking to a business, if I'm talking to somebody at a nonprofit, this probably doesn't work, right? So there we want to do something different. And there I might say, as a professor, I developed programs that met their immediate objectives while advancing the shared goals of my department and the organization, and the organization's larger strategy. And what I mean by this is that I taught courses that did 3 things, that functioned in their own right as courses, that met the requirements of core curriculum or major, and that also aligned with presidential visions for the college's future. Now, this frames my experience in a way that makes sense to nonprofits, right? It shows that I can account for organizational mission and collective needs when I do my day-to-day work. And it shows that I recognize that that connection of mission and work is pivotal and even paramount over and above dollars generated. Of course, it depends on who I'm speaking with. With the executive director of a nonprofit, that's probably a good way to go. If I'm applying for a fundraising role, a development role, though, I might want to go back to that business description where actually value generation matters a good deal more. So again, all of this is contextual. Okay. Now, the important thing here is that none of these statements is a lie. In fact, all of them are true. I did teach 3 courses a semester. I did deliver educational services valued at $500,000 per year. I did develop syllabi that met departmental, core curriculum, and strategic goals. But framing my experience differently gives each of my audiences an access point, right? And what I'm trying to do here is make people more receptive to what I am telling them. I'm helping them connect the dots between what I've done and what they do. And that is absolutely essential if they are going to turn around and hand my name or my resume, God willing, to a colleague who's hiring, because they need to be able to retell the definition of kind of my story of my value in terms that make sense in their world, if that's going to be communicated effectively. So you can't actually build your network unless you are also translating effectively, helping people help you, right? You need them to be able to advocate on your behalf. Now, you can only do this if you spend lots of time learning different professional languages. If I keep blathering about my epic poet, nobody is going to listen. Now, the only thing I want to add on this point is that you all actually translate like this all the time anyway, just in a narrower context, right? When you're teaching, you're always going between, say, undergraduate audiences, intro-level courses, and experts if you're giving a paper at a conference, for example. Or if you're doing public speaking or on Twitter, you maybe have a different public audience in mind. You already select details all the time. All narratives select details by definition. All I'm telling you to do is to exercise that prudence and that discipline as you're searching for careers as well. Use those tools in the service of career management. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground. To recap, I've talked about how informational interviews will help you discover possible career paths, expand the number of people who can help you find a job, and translate your experience for non-academic audiences. As I said at the start, informational interviews are an incredibly powerful tool to do these things. That's why I made them central to the career change strategy in my book. But that really does just scratch the surface of what you need to do in the course of a career change. As you depart academia, you will also need to navigate the identity crisis that comes with giving up a career that so many of us view as a vocation, right? You need to prioritize what you want out of life so you can actually find a career that satisfies those needs instead of taking a stab in the dark on another next step. You're going to need to build new skills, and you're going to need to learn new knowledge sets that will help you when you start working beyond the ivory tower. And you need to adjust eventually, hopefully, to a new work environment that's going to be radically different from the one you know now in higher education. So there's still a lot of work to do here, and you do need to own that yourself. Now, my hope in this session is that I've given all of you a good running start towards whatever is going to come next, and I've given you tools to do it with less pain than I experienced over 2.5 years. For now, I'm happy to use our remaining time to answer any questions you might have about how to leave academia as efficiently and as painlessly as possible. And I just want to say thank you very much for coming today. How did I get to that $500,000 a year annually? Okay, so what I did was I found the annual tuition at the college I was teaching at, and I divided it by 10, which would have given 10 courses per semester, which is kind of roughly how much the average undergraduate takes. I then counted up the number of students I'd taught in the previous year, and I just multiplied. And this is why I'm careful to say educational services valued at, because I don't want to have to do the math of accounting for financial aid. So I can just take kind of the sticker value of that and run it down. Have I had more success seeking informational interviews on LinkedIn or via email? That is an interesting one. You know, it's been a mix Some of the best conversations that I had actually came from emailing kind of local companies here in New Orleans. It's a pretty small city. And it was easy to find people's contact information and get like really good high quality meetings. With LinkedIn, I've had a few. Oddly enough, Twitter is one of the places where I found a ton of contacts and people willing to take time. I don't include that in the book because I wasn't as actively involved in Twitter as I am now when I wrote the thing. But that's like on the docket for revisions if I ever get a second edition. Is that Twitter is an awesome place to go. So you can use Twitter, LinkedIn, email. It kind of depends. You never know what somebody's going to be most comfortable with. So, try a bunch of different avenues and see what works best for you. But really, any means necessary to make that ask. Other questions? What would I do as a first-year student? I see that coming in from the chat from James. I think, there's a number that I didn't share today, which is that at least pre-pandemic, 93% of students in the humanities and social sciences did not, entering students in those disciplines did not get a tenure track job. So the vast majority of people will not be tenured professors. I think we just need to accept that as a fact of life now. And the thing that I think you can do as a first-year student is to begin this process of informational interviews as early as possible. And to my mind, if 93% of people don't get a tenure track job, then the professoriate cannot be plan A. It can be a job that you might want to do, but you cannot manage your time in grad school and your career by just saying, that is what I want to do. You need to have other options. So conducting informational interviews, participating in events like this one, using the GradFutures program at Princeton, which is superb, or for folks who are from outside of Princeton on the line, whatever your individual university has. There are lots of I don't want to say equivalent programs, but similar programs. Relying on all of that and essentially not allowing yourself to get narrowed into this idea that your identity is so tied up in becoming a professor that you are going to be adrift for 2 or 2.5 years if that doesn't shake out. Because for most of us, it doesn't. And I think the sooner that you disentangle your identity and your work, the happier you're going to be and the easier of a time you're going to have. Seeing one on the side, how many ballpark informational interviews did it take to get the first non-academic job? I think it was 150. But that number is probably high because I wasn't very good at it to start. I was kind of making it up as I went along and didn't realize that there were probably plenty of good resources I could have gone to by non-academics that could have helped me in that endeavor. And I think that if I'd been sort of more clear about what I wanted out of life at the start, I could have been more targeted in how I went about that process. So 150 is a lot, but it's high. And it's probably more than you might need. But again, I wanted to cast a wide net and see what I could do. And if you'll indulge me for a moment, the informational interview that led to that first non-academic job is one that I almost didn't take. I want to say it was April of or February of 2017. I'd been working at a friend's business. I was teaching full time. I was supporting 2 nonprofits. I was doing informational interviews all the time. Excuse me, just run ragged. And a friend said, "Hey, I tried to connect you to somebody a few weeks ago, but the note didn't go through. I'm connecting you now." And I almost didn't take it. But I ended up choosing to take that call out of respect to Mike Zim, who made the connection, because I didn't want him to have used his political capital on this relationship to no avail. And it turns out that call went really well. The person knew somebody who was actually from my field of classics originally, who had hired him. And I had a call with that guy. And that guy referred me into a job that I didn't know was about to list at the start of a new fiscal year. So, it's a lot, but at a certain point, that math just works out in your favor. And sometimes it's the last one you think it's going to be that pays off. how do you deal with the feeling of leaving academia? Well, you probably don't want to do it the way I did, which was with alcohol and depression and no therapist. So you can kind of deal with that too. Look, I think so many of us do feel that academia is a vocation. We feel called to do this. And, because we feel called to do it, because we're passionate about what we do, people take advantage of us over that, right? They pay us less. They expect us to do things for free. And it's, I think we get our identity tied up in this so much that it can be hard to pull away. And the scariest thing is that you don't know what's coming next. And the only thing I can tell you is that I've spoken with a lot of people who've had this experience of doing informational interviews really intensively, kind of not knowing what's coming next, not knowing what their next professional identity is going to be, but kind of getting to this mindset shift where they are all of a sudden less afraid of that unknown. They're less afraid of that unknown than they are of losing the identity that they have. And I think it really comes down to familiarity. And like I was totally narrowed down into classical studies by the time I left that field, or kind of committed to leaving that field in 2016. And you need to branch out. You need to remember who you are and figure out who that might be. How do you deal with it? I would say get a therapist. Don't consume too much alcohol. Those are mistakes I made. But it's essentially one of exploration, and you won't actually resolve it until you become comfortable with that idea of something else being okay. And that's a personal journey. So that's something you need to figure out for yourself. Any advice for international grad students? Yes and no. I would say that because I am a U.S. citizen, I was born here and grew up here. I didn't have to face the pressures that you all do face, especially as it relates to visas. What I do know is that there is a huge network of former academics who have remained in the U.S. Who are always eager to help people out and to provide guidance on how to navigate that. One thing that I'll say that is maybe gives a little bit more optimism to folks in that set is that, I talked about translation and this issue of like learning new professional cultures. And there's an element of culture shock in all of that, right? Which is like leaving what you know, getting into something new and figuring out how to navigate it. I've spoken with a number of international PhDs about the fact that like you all already have that experience. You've done the hard thing of leaving someplace and coming to the US, of working in a new professional language many times. All of this difficulty of figuring out how to translate things is actually a skill set that you all have already developed. So I would say lean on some of those experiences to the extent that you can, and build on that to make this process a little bit easier. You have some things that are going to, if not be perfect analogies, analogous slightly. And so I would say, draw on that to the extent you can. Find a close network of people who have been through that experience, who can help you navigate the unique challenges. And I have a few people in mind. So, reach out to me on Twitter and LinkedIn, and I can make those connections. But I don't want to speak about something that goes so far beyond my own experience. Okay, thinking about the statement, overqualified but underskilled, do we need to do anything to acquire some sort of skills needed for a particular profession? Sometimes. Yeah, sometimes you do. But you don't actually know what those are until you kind of go out and ask and meet people. And you don't know, what is actually a required skill and what's a nice to have skill until you start talking to people in those roles. And you don't actually know what they mean by proficiency, right? There are an awful lot of like bad computer coders who kind of get by on, knowing a little bit of basic grammar in their computing language and then Googling everything they need to do. And it's kind of inefficient, but they can get the job done well enough. And if they're cheap, that's okay. But I would say, you will need to build some skills. Some are more discrete than others. But you kind of need to go out and figure out, where are your interests? What are roles that you think you might want to do? And if you do identify a knowledge that you need to have, right? Whether it is, facility with GIS, or whether it is, deep knowledge of Excel, or whether it is getting a certification as a project management professional for project management. You kind of need to feel that out, figure out what's right for you. And then, yes, you might need to build those skills. But I would suggest that you find unique ways to do so through temp work, through volunteering, and other methods, rather than simply taking classes. You'll have done enough school. You need to learn by doing at this point. And Genevieve, if that's not helpful, ask another question. I can follow up with that. Oh yeah, how do you handle conversations with academic colleagues about leaving? When I made the decision to leave, I did kind of communicate it by email, and I had some awkwardness for sure. And I think some people didn't quite know what to do with it. It sort of depends on your field, though. I think if you're in the sciences and you have a PI who really controls your funding and your paycheck, if you're an international student, if you have a PI who controls your visa status, this can be a really fraught conversation. You might want to be quieter about making this kind of exploration if you think that you have somebody who is, I'll say, old-fashioned and vindictive, who might make you suffer for it. That's a real threat, and I don't want to downplay it at all. On the other hand, I think if, again, to go back to my 93% figure, if like that many people were not becoming tenure track professors even before the pandemic, then anybody who teaches only for the outcome of a tenure track role is being unethical as a faculty member and as an advisor to graduate students. I would flat out say that that's what's going on, is they are not doing their jobs well if they're teaching for 7% of outcomes. So you sort of have two choices here. You can confront those people over their unethical behavior and tell them to change. You can be quiet about it, and they don't need to know what you do in your free time. It's none of their business. Or hopefully the conversation is beginning to shift on campuses, and I think it is, at least in some disciplines, over this being the norm rather than the exception. And you can find those communities where you can have those conversations openly. But I think anytime you tell an advisor, hey, I'm hanging it up, if you'd been pursuing an academic career prior to that, that is, it can generate some tension potentially. And yeah, again, that's sort of personal, depends on the relationship you have. I didn't have much contact with my advisor for a little while after I made that announcement, but now we're both on Twitter and we interact on a daily or weekly basis. So, things are fine. That's good. Ooh, here we go. What advice do you have for someone who's between positions and doesn't have much to translate into how you do it and why it matters? So, Richard, here I would say being between positions still means that you have experience, right? You can still talk about what you've done in the past. And the trick here is to kind of figure out what actually matters from that experience. One thing that I've noticed is that academics tend to think of experience along the three so-called legs of the tenure stool, right? Research, teaching, and service. And I think we tend to think of our experience primarily as research, then sometimes as teaching, and lastly as service. That's how we value it and prioritize it in academia. If you had any service experience, whether it was organizing conferences or leading a committee, whatever it is, that work looks the most like work to people outside of higher education. So you can go to that. The other ways you can build that experience is to either find a nonprofit that you are willing to volunteer with, but don't just volunteer to swing a hammer with Habitat. Say hey, look, I'm trying to build X, Y, or Z skill based on informational interviews you've done. You've identified something you need to do, and ask them if they need help with it, and if they're willing to have you learn as you go. Most nonprofits are not going to say no to free help. So you can do a good thing and get something out of it simultaneously. You might also be able to find some part-time work on sites like Upwork, I think is one of them. And not TaskRabbit, but there are a couple of these other sort of contract sites where people can go and say, hey, I need somebody to rewrite the copy for my website. And you can just go and bid on the work. And, you don't make a ton of money doing it because you have people offshore who can do it at lower rates, but it can help you start building a portfolio and building a skill set. And the cost is low. If you do it and it doesn't go well, that's okay. You just don't put that on your resume anymore. You tried it out, it failed, that's fine. But if it does go well, that can be a way to build that experience. Oh yeah, Peter, good question. So, like, what do you do if someone thinks you just want to go back to the library? I had that issue with somebody in New Orleans. He owns and runs a small consultancy here, and he said, "Hey, look, I really like you. I think we're going to work together someday." He actually said, "But this is not the position." He said, I think you want to go back and read your books." And I'm like, "No, I'm telling you, like, I want to." I want to work in a more collaborative environment. I'm done with that life. And he couldn't quite get past it. Peter, I would say that if that happens, it's probably an indication that something in the way you are conveying yourself is still showing yourself as an academic. And one of the things that you can do is to start trying to behave more like the people whose profession you're trying to join than you might have done to date. And that could be a helpful way, I think, to offset that. The other thing I'll say here is that I thought that was a really promising opportunity for me, and I still have conversations with that guy all the time. And I actually almost applied for a job at his company last month, except that I started a new one recently at my current company. There are other people out there, and like that's the thing. You go on LinkedIn and you do a search for somebody with a given skill, and you find tens of thousands of people. And most jobs, because of the pandemic, are remote now. So if one doesn't go your way, so what? Move on. Find another. It took me a long time to learn that. Like even in dating, I was always bad at it. Like I was always in a long-term relationship, still am. And it was kind of uncomfortable for me to figure out that like actually networking can be kind of like dating. You can have 1 or 2 dates and then go your separate ways, and that's okay. No big deal.
Thank you, Chris, so much for sharing candidly about your personal story, for your combination, as always, of practical and inspirational advice. I love the ABC approach to networking. And honestly, I know we've spoken about this, but really taking that initiative and reaching out for informational interviews is also so empowering. And I think there are benefits for well-being for our graduate students. And I know you have mentioned this in other talks as well, that just taking that initiative, feeling like you have agency in the process is so important.
Absolutely.
We invite graduate students to join us throughout the rest of the day, virtually and online. We're going to provide you with a way to immediately act on Chris's advice about applying your research skills, building a network, an authentic network, and authentic relationships, and conducting informational interviews. Coming up the rest of the afternoon in the multi-purpose room in the Frisk Campus Center, we have several campus partners and consultants with whom you can meet, learn, share, and connect. We have experts from LinkedIn who are doing one-on-one social media consultations. So as we know, Chris offered lots of great advice for how to reach out. We want you to do that in a way that it feels authentic and real. We also have photographers here that can help you make that great first virtual impression. And again, express yourself in your photo. We're also excited to have alumna, entrepreneur, and expert in storytelling, Carol Barish. She's our first alumna in residence, and she will be here meeting with graduate students this afternoon to help you hone your storytelling skills, how you convey your unique skills and interests, and plan your next steps. Later this afternoon, we also have our next panel, Graduate Education, Then, Now, Next, and a wonderful networking reception. Again, helping you forge those all-important, authentic relationships that Chris talked about. Chris, you have a busy afternoon. I see on Twitter that you're headed to Georgetown for their Grad Career Week.
I am, yes.
Wonderful. Oh my goodness. Well, again, it's because your advice just truly resonates. It's, again, inspirational, it's practical, and it's so authentic and real because you've lived this. You are sharing personally what you've gone through and how you really have put together that portfolio of experiences and translated those skills. So again, this is proven advice. We hope that every graduate student who is listening today and joined us today will take next steps and put those words of wisdom to the test and apply that advice quickly. Again, thank you so much for joining us, Chris. We're so excited to have you back. We know we will be inviting you again for sure. And we wish you all the best this afternoon with, I'm sure, a very eager Georgetown audience.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me.
Thank you.